always, by a giant sentient bag of mail that I have named Scott Daly. Scott, how are you doing?
Dearest Matt, I am doing very well, thank you. Sincerely, a giant bag of sentient mail named Scott. This is the weekly podcast where you and I eagerly dive into Wildbow's world of heated Nazi arguments, challenging questions, and alien-based death powers as we analyze and interpret this ongoing web serial. This week, Matt, it's mailbag time.
That's right, Scott.
I am on vacation this week, as you have probably noticed by how I sound a little different. But instead of taking the whole week off, we decided that it would be fun to read your questions instead. So we're going to do that. Again, apologies for the audio quality. I am sitting in Matt's kitchen right now. Ironically, Matt, I drove all the way up here, and we're not in the same room still.
Yeah, it's far too sophisticated to use modern technology to record two people in the same room, and easier to just put them in separate rooms and connect them together over, VoIP.
Yeah, that seems like a dystopian nightmare, but you're true. You're absolutely right.
Yep. All right, so quick announcement before we start on the questions. Fan art contest reminder. The fan art contest has begun. The theme is family, and the contest will run until Friday, August 17th at 11:59 p.m. Click the link in the description of this episode for the official rules.
Yeah, we're very excited about that. So get to work.
Yeah.
We're going to keep reminding you guys so you don't forget.
All right, now let's just dig on into this big old bag of mail here. Let me just rummage.
So many questions.
In the top here, looks like. All right, so from we have a bunch from Callen 98. Wait.
Yeah.
Yeah, 985 to open it up.
Before we get started, maybe we should say, here's what we're going to do. We pulled all your questions. We threw them in alphabetical order, and we're going to get through as many of them as we can. We're going to have to, we got a lot of questions this time, 40 or 50 questions. So we're going to try to knock out every single one if we can. But we also tend to go on for too long on each question.
Yeah,
so
that's not a strong suit of ours. Anyway, moving on. So Callen starts off by asking... They basically point out that Game of Thrones, Westworld, even Rick and Morty are shows where it can sort of ruin the show if the internet solves the plot, too quickly. And they feel like the type of analysis that we bring to Worm and Ward is not such that it would ruin the story if we figured it out or something like that. And I think that's an interesting difference in the way we approach with our criticism, or a difference in the work itself, or both. And I think that it's both, but I think that that's because of a difference in the work, and it necessitates that we cover it differently, because it's just not, it's just not a completely plot driven enterprise where everything hinges on detailed clues. It's something that kind of evolved over time.
I completely agree with that. And I'll also say, personally, it's a conscious effort on my part to never be that kind of critic. I think I did that with Lost. Before I was even writing or talking about film or movies or TV, I was really into Lost and solving the mystery box. And it's the kind of show that makes you do that kind of. And I was so disappointed by how that show ended. I just decided I don't want to do that anymore. So that's not the type of critic I want to be. And so I think that is something we've consciously tried to do with the show is I don't want to build it as this is just a mystery waiting to be solved, because I just don't think that's the right way to appreciate stories.
Yeah. And with these stories in particular, you're enjoying them, you're enjoying every page of it. You're not thinking oh man, this is going to be awesome when we find out what it really is, because frankly, it never is. Almost no story I've ever read was I wow, that really earned all the buildup, maybe one.
And that makes me kind of want to go back and revisit Lost, honestly, because I wonder if I look at that show and approach it with the mindset that I have today, where I don't care about the mystery. Let's talk about the character. I don't care about where the story's going to go. Let's focus more on what is happening to our characters. I don't care who the man in black is. It doesn't matter. But what does that say about Jack and Locke and all these characters? I think maybe I'd enjoy that show and how it ended a lot more.
Maybe so.
Yeah. But again, it was a show that basically demanded you do that kind of thing. And that's why I just haven't gotten into Westworld at all, because it's that exact same kind of thing where it's just a show demanding to be like scrutinized, but for the wrong things, I think.
Yeah, I agree.
All right. Next up, another question from Calerno. How do you think Ward is doing at balancing the need/desire to include old characters and favorites in reasonable ways versus giving in to blatant fan service?
Yeah, I mean, I'm surprised at how slowly they've been doled out. Like I remember when we thought we were going to see Vista and then we didn't, and we met Weld relatively early, but yeah, I'm very happy with the balance that's being struck here. I guess I don't know. If you'd asked me when the story was starting, I would have said like, yeah, I mean, we're definitely going to see these characters because we know that they're important.
Right.
And we may not see. So like, I can't say that I guess if I'm surprised at anything, it's how long it's taken for us to meet, for example, Dragon.
Yeah.
But I don't have any complaints about it. It's just interesting.
Yeah, no, I pretty much completely agree. I think it is probably very tempting to want to loop these old characters in just because Wildbow clearly enjoys them and he probably likes writing them. And I think it's a combination of taking your time to dole them out and also how they're framed in their reveals. Like I think Tattletale's a fan favorite and she's in the story, but the way we did it, we put her opposite of our characters, which is a place that we're not used to her being. And that's why it feels less fan servicey, because her appearance is at the whim of the story, not at the whim of, did you want to see this character again?
Yeah, I think in all cases, Wildbow has sat down and been like, all right, what has Vista been doing for all this time? Oh, okay, well, it makes sense that she would have gotten herself involved with this hero group over here because that's kind of her thing. And then in this scene, it makes sense that she would come across Victoria, and it's very organic. Everything's been organic, and that's the main thing.
And look, a little bit of fan service is okay.
Yeah.
Like it's not going to ruin the story.
Right.
If you just show off a character that people like, that's fine.
Yeah.
It's just when it gets carried away and turns into that whole thing. And yeah, I think Ward has done a really good job at that so far.
Yeah, I agree. Next, another one from Calenero. What character from Worm that we haven't seen yet in Ward do you most want to catch up with, excluding Taylor? My first thoughts were Theo on the one hand, and then Sophia on the other. And that's actually kind of a not serious, because I actually don't want to see her in the story, because I like to I like her being left behind by the story. And, we just assume that she's, spelunking off in the darkness, like Aisha said she would be. But it would also be very satisfying to see that was true.
Yeah, well, and I wonder how that could reflect on what this book is talking about. Like there was this real sense that Sophia just did not mesh with the world and therefore had to leave it behind. And I wonder if her returning to the story signifies something about the shape the world is in.
That's interesting.
I said Theo also because I love him and I just want to see what he's been up to and how he's doing.
Yeah, right. That's the main thing, because I think we remarked previously that we just, at the end of Worm, we don't really know. We know he's alive. I'm pretty sure we know he's alive, but we don't know if he's just spiritually crushed by what happened or what. So
yeah. I'm very curious what is his state of mind is at, because I mean he trained for 2 years with this idea that if he fails, the world will end, and the world ended.
Yeah.
So I wonder how he's doing with that.
Yeah. So next question, again from Calenero. If Ward is going to have a big bad like Scion and Worm, who at this point do you think it's most likely to be?
You want to answer first? Yeah, you can answer this one first.
Yeah, I kind of don't think it will have a big bad.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think if this is a story that we think it is, if this is about recovery and it's having to say something about how you recover from trauma, then I think oftentimes our trauma is not taken the form of one big thing that we can conquer, one powerful thing that's an encapsulation of all the bad things that have happened that we can just defeat and then we're better. It's much more about small incremental victories and progress, and I think that would be very thematically fitting if there was no big bad, if it was just a series of problems that our characters are going to have to face that are increasingly more dire.
Yeah, I think that makes a tremendous amount of sense. All right, next one, last question from Callen. What are you most looking forward to about Ward? And yeah, you go first.
I'm really interested. I really want to see how Victoria continues to evolve. That conversation, that confrontation with Amy is always on the horizon, and I want to see what that looks like. And I think it's very important that she's in a better place when that inevitably comes. And we've seen her make progress, but she's definitely still not there. So I'm very interested in seeing that. And the other thing I said was this idea of a Cape afterlife we've kind of paid lip service to so far. I'm interested in what that looks like and how these themes of spirituality and what happens when you die and how it reflects on Rain's cluster and all that, and seeing where that is explored in the story. Really into that.
Yeah, totally. I agree with both of those. I put down basically, like, I feel like I'm always learning about human psychology from reading these stories. So learning more psychology, having some more crushing character moments that I can't possibly anticipate at this point. And of course, more wonderful poetic / ironic power backstories for the characters.
Oh yeah, it's this book constantly makes you think that we can't come up with any new interesting ones, and then it does every time.
Yep.
All right, the next question is from Charlie, who sent this in via email, and he asks, "Who are the best parents in Worm / Ward?" And of those people, what are the most common effective traits that Wildbow uses, either positively or negatively, to quickly signify what side of the line of good parent someone falls under? So, Matt, who are the best parents in Worm Ward? Are there?
Yeah,
are there best parents?
I don't know. I don't know of any like parents that I immediately would say these guys are really great. I mean, It's almost like the characters are usually in some kind of crisis mode, and they're not thinking like, man, I sure am grateful to have my stable, loving parents. So I actually thought about it quite a bit, and I couldn't think of any that I would just say like unambiguously. But in terms of like the flags indicating whether someone's a good parent or not, I think it has something to do with, and I don't know if this is exactly the right word, but like the selfishness that comes across in the character, in contrast to like a parent who puts their child's needs first. And there's kind of some gray area between those two, because very often, like, Carol is a classic where she thinks she's putting Victoria's needs first, but her sense of what's best for Victoria is pretty warped. So it's complicated, obviously, but I feel like that's kind of the knob that does a lot of the work here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I agree with you. And I think the fact that there are not easily grabbed examples of good parents is intentional in the story. And I think part of what it's saying is, raising a kid who's been through the level of trauma that a lot of these parents have, or these children have been through, is very difficult. And it's hard, and you make mistakes. Like, I think it's very easy to call Danny a bad parent, but Danny also was struggling with a deck or a hand that he was dealt that not many parents have to experience. So I think we tend to write these people off too quickly because they do make big mistakes that hurt their children a lot. But I think that's part of what the book is saying.
Yeah, and I mean, just parenting is intrinsically difficult. The parent-child relationship is intrinsically full of conflict, and the mistakes tend to be the type that are only visible after like 15 years of hindsight. Good luck with that, everyone. I do like your idea of selfishness as this big representative, because I think if you look back, the especially bad parents, like I think Danny, you could call a bad parent and then he makes a lot of mistakes, but I think his heart is kind of always in the right place. He just screws up. But yeah, the clearly like, you are a bad parent. Kenzie's parents, it is all around who they're putting first, and it so often is themselves. Yeah, I think you're right.
Cool.
Constantine sends us a very nice email and asks, in our opinion, what is Ward saying about Taylor, Skitter, Weaver, and Kefri that Worm hasn't or wasn't able to? How have the themes been extended into the new series?
This was a really interesting question that I thought quite a bit on, because as I think our next question asker also says, there's this weird gap in everyone's dialogue about the traumas they've been through that does not include what Taylor did. Some of them probably don't remember it, but I'm sure there's some of our characters that were aware it was happening, right? So, but no one has talked about it. Like, this has not been something that people have consciously talked about through the story. And I do think that in order for them to get to a place where recovery is possible, what Taylor did is going to have to be approached in some way and dealt with.
Yeah, it's only really been talked about obliquely, and the most we talked about it, I think, was actually in Glowworm when Victoria sort of gives a little bit of a eulogy to Taylor for Madison's sake, and what that is really doing is it's casting Victoria's kind of mentality at the start of the story.
Right.
So we're learning more about Victoria than we're learning about like the world. It's a very thought-provoking question, and I wish I had like an answer, but I think I'm just going to say that it's productive to think about that one.
My quick and dirty answer is this. Taylor thought that she could overcome her trauma by beating it into submission, by actively destroying the things that caused it. And this story very clearly represents a different interpretation from that. The way to recover from your trauma is not by fighting it, not by bullying it, not by beating it up. And I think we can see that throughout everything our characters have done. How the violence, the action is so often not the right way.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, and moving on to that next question, we're kind of going to transition right into it because Daniel also via email asks, I wonder how you think the trauma of Khepri is going to be dealt with during the recovery of individual characters, the team as a whole, or the larger world in general. So we kind of touched on this a little bit, but Matt, you have anything for this?
Yeah, just like my first thought, I guess, was that most people seem to be more traumatized by Gold Mourning and all of the loss of their world and their loved ones than by Khepri. I mean, yeah, they got mind controlled and used and maybe forced to do things, and it was probably very disconcerting, but we haven't really met any particular people whose main problem was with the being controlled part and not the massive loss of everything you love part. But maybe we will. Maybe we'll meet someone like Goddess, for example, where she's got her own world out there, presumably. I mean, we don't know what happened to her world, but maybe it's fine, and maybe she could just go back to it. And for her, the traumatic thing or the damaging thing was being snatched by Khepri. And there may be a lot of people in that situation, actually. So, but yeah, like, and another thing that occurred to me was that I wonder how long Taylor was in that state, puppeteering people in the first place. Like, how long did that event actually last? And I realized
it could have been like an hour.
Yeah, I realized I didn't know, and that made me wonder, like, well, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah, I think the other reason it hasn't been brought up as much is because our point of view character, her trauma is so focused on a thing that happened before this and the transformation back into her normal self immediately after it. So the bad things that happened to her are so focused on those areas and so not focused on Khepri and Gold Mourning itself that it's not something she thinks about very often. So it will be interesting. I think you're right that we're going to get some characters eventually who the main bad stuff that happened to them is tied to Khepri's control. I think it's bound to happen eventually, but
yeah,
there seems to be a don't ask, don't tell general rule around it right now because no one's talking about it.
Yeah, right. From Ethical Ham Jimmy, is that right? Anyway,
sure.
They ask, what other characters do you guys would we like to see? Would we have liked to see as the protagonist before we found out that Victoria was going to be the lead? For instance, it's fairly well known that characters like Aegis, Faultline, and Circus were all once considered to be the protagonist. Who do you think would work, and who has the necessary complexity?
Yeah, I think complexity wise, I think any character can be complex if you just draw them that way. Like even the simplest character on the surface, when you're sat in their head, could end up being really complex. You just didn't know it yet. So I don't think we should limit ourselves just by, well, this character seems really simple. Seems like they wouldn't really have anything to do or say or any thematic relevance to anything. But once you get in their head, that whole perspective changes, I think.
Yeah, I agree completely. What Scott said. Yeah. And also before the story started, I, for some reason, had it like lodged in my head that Ward was going to take place hundreds of years in the future, like in a very different world, and that we weren't going to have the same characters. And so I was just not even thinking along these lines. That's
interesting. Yeah. I mean, that would have been a completely different thing it would be tackling. And that could be an interesting story itself.
Yeah.
I hadn't really ever thought of that. I had a list. Like I thought it could be Amy. I thought it could be Golem. I thought it could be Valkyrie or Lisa or any of these people. I thought, and like I said, I think at the beginning that I was like 50-50 on whether it was going to be an old character or a new character. And I see now why it had to be an old character, because we're talking about recovery. So
yeah.
We need someone that we're connected to through the previous story. And I continue to think Victoria was such a clever, wonderful choice.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Executioner 404 from Reddit asks, where do you see the Parahumans multiverse 4 years from now? Whether you want to imagine a happy ending or a different kind of status quo, or even a worse post-apocalyptic environment, I'm wondering what your own vision of the future is based on your extensive knowledge of the themes and setups of the story. So, Matt, you want to try this one?
Yeah, this ties into some other questions that we got where and I guess I'm probably going to have to give a similar answer to those later too, but it really depends on what the author wants to say with these themes, because and I think, and we talked about this yesterday, Scott, like how the theme is recovery, but you can spin that any which way. Like the theme can be recovery ... is impossible, and all the characters completely faceplant in their attempts, and it just gets worse and worse and worse, and is a tragedy of someone struggling to try to get better and failing, or it can be recovery is a slow grind. It's hard, it's difficult. It takes way more time than you want it to, but you get there eventually, and it doesn't look like you thought it would. I mean, really, who knows? Like, I honestly can't just like look at, even having read each of these chapters multiple times, I can't just be like, well, this is the trajectory. I can tell you the themes, but it could really still go any number of ways in terms of what is this actually going to look like in terms of an ending.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. My guess is we're going to say very complicated things about recovery. I think something you said that I immediately like honed in on was this idea of it doesn't look like what you think it's going to. And I think that's likely where we're going to end up. It's this bittersweet realization that the cost of recovery is so much greater than we thought it was. And the lengths that you have to go through and the things that have to happen to get there, how dark it has to get before you get there, would be a very interesting way of exploring it. So, I mean, how that looks to an entire world 4 years from now, I think I don't see I don't see just like we're going to do another like post-apocalyptic cycle, but I do think like the status quo is going to be fundamentally shifted from where it is right now, and not in a way that any of our characters currently think it will be.
Yeah. I think I may have some thoughts that are sort of contextualized about things that happened in Twig, but I'm not going to say them here for obvious reasons.
Yeah, that's cheating.
Yeah,
that's why.
Next, unless you had any more thoughts.
No.
From EXE JPEG WMV, do you guys think that Sveta is hiding something?
Yes. I think everyone's hiding something, especially in this story. Everyone has something they're not sharing with the rest of the group. And I think Sveta's eager, unending optimism is a mask for some greater stuff that's going on underneath.
Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah. And as I said in the Reddit, she's probably hiding chocolate.
Yeah, which we all know what that means.
Mm-hmm. We all know exactly what that means.
All right. This question is from Johnson, who says, given the increasing number of parahumans and the decreasing power normal power normal people have due to infrastructure breaking down, overall tech levels regressing, etc. How long will it take until society is ready to backslide into actual parahuman feudalism? I think we're basically there. So what, two years?
Yeah.
Given that the backslide into feudalism is probably inevitable, do you think a structured, orderly change to this sort of society could save lives? What do you think about that, Matt?
I think I don't necessarily want to take the premise for granted that we're doing this thing that looks like feudalism, where the capes are lords and everyone else is a second class citizen, because I mean that's what Cauldron planned, but it takes a lot of things happening in the right order to get there. And one thing that keeps occurring to me, and I think this story is shoving this in our face, I think that's why it's occurring to me. It's not that I'm just picking this out, is that like the current paradigm, the way powers work, is inherently chaotic. You've got this outside force, this literally alien force, selectively empowering usually the humans who you would least want to be empowered, and continuing to do this over time, regardless of who is in charge at the moment, almost by design, continually disrupting the status quo. You know, even without a entity guiding the process, it's going to continue to be this way. So I don't think you can bet on any particular paradigm just being a great solution, unless it's really clever or changes the rules in some way.
Yeah, and I don't think that like looking at the situation and saying, okay, we're inevitably going to get to feudalism, so we might as well do it now. And if everyone just accepts it, it'll be a peaceful transition to this, because I think what Worm showed us is that even when you go into that kind of structure with the best intentions, which is what Taylor has, it is still inherently chaotic, like you said, and it still will inherently break down and turn into chaos and squabbling and infighting and all this stuff. Like, cooperation sounds great, but it's really hard to do.
Yeah, I mean, just take an example. Like, if people can't coordinate against the machine army, then there's no Cape feudalism, because there's no people.
Right.
So you have to have some kind of coordination, and that's really difficult.
Yeah. And I think part of it, like, I think one of the things that I want this story to do, and I think it's going to do, is this, we're talking about this conflict between Cape and human, and how these sides aren't communicating with us. They're not sharing anything. And I think one thing that the characters in the story really need to do is understand that these people went through trauma too. Like a lot of capes, like Victoria especially, looks at this idea of cape trauma and the things capes have gone through and say, this is unique to us. No one but a cape can understand what this is. No one but a cape can understand what we are. And we have to recognize that, like, the world ended. Like, the world ended, and there are humans left in this world that, yes, they don't have superpowers, but they went through horribly traumatic stuff too. So, like, we have to get together around the shared trauma that we all experience together. Yes, I know, like, you capes have been through some stuff and you're granted some power and you have this thing in your head pushing you to do things, but we all went through some shit, and the only way to get through the post shit is together.
Yeah. Good. Yep. Perfect. Okay. Next question from Joshua via email. What order do you think the remaining members of Team Breakthrough will get a big focus on? Will Sveta be skipped because we got a lot of her in Worm? So what do you think is the order going to be?
No, Sveta will not be skipped. Yeah, we got a lot of her in Worm, but I think what the story is doing with her in this instance is very different from what we showed her in that story. So she's an important cog in this whole recovery machine. I feel like, based on the setup we've done, Tristan and Byron feel like they're, like we talked last week, how they were coming to this make or break point. So they feel like they're next. And then Chris, I think, is pretty close behind them, judging by some of the things that he's going through. But I also think Sveta is this thing in the background that could slip in between any of these or before any of them, because she's the one that we know is very disturbed about this idea of things are getting worse, and we're seeing things get worse. And that is something she seemed that she could not accept. Like, she just was completely unwilling to do that, which is this unending positivity, this relentless optimism. that we've seen her have, and how it's getting like whittled away as each new thing happens, as we descend into darkness a little bit more and a little bit more, and that could break her, and it could come from nowhere, because I think out of all these people, Victoria is worried about her the least.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree with you about Sveta, and I agree with you about the order of the other two. So don't really have anything to add there.
All right. This is also from Joshua, also via email. You have to wake up in either the DC live action movie universe or Ward. Which do you pick, Matt?
I think I picked the DC universe because you at least know that they're not going to literally destroy the world and kill everyone in a DC movie. Because, I mean, those movies may not be crowd pleasers, but they I don't think they go that far. Whereas I have no such guarantees in Ward. So
that's true. I picked Ward, Matt, because at least if I die horribly in the Parahumans universe, I'll know it was in service of a well-constructed and executed story. Boom.
That's how we all like to live, right?
Yes, exactly.
That's good. Okay. So next question from Julio from an email is asking us, first of all, they assume that we're really knowledgeable about comic books, which I don't think is accurate.
No, he cites when I talked about Superman a lot, because the only comic book I'm really knowledgeable about is Superman, because I really like Superman.
Yeah. I mean, I think we both read a smattering. I wouldn't call myself knowledgeable. And then they ask us to compare and contrast superheroes and supervillains with characters, so basically compare a Marvel or DC superhero, supervillain with its sort of archetypal counterpart in Parahumans, like Taylor and Peter Parker, or Victoria and Supergirl, or Chris and Hulk. And I think that's a pretty fun exercise, but I don't know if we're going to be particularly clever in that.
What I will do, I think what we should say is, listeners, do this. I'm really interested to see what you guys come up with this. And I think Julio in his examples here mostly picked archetype matching by power set, right? Like like Taylor and Peter Parker are not really character wise very similar people, but their power sets match up. So maybe do a version of that. I encourage you guys to try this, because I'm really interested to see what you come up with, and maybe do one that's more like character focused, like which worm character trait wise is similar to which superhero.
Yeah. I like,
but I think we can speak generally.
Yeah. I like the one they pulled out, Bonesaw and Harley Quinn, because they don't have similar powers, but they do have the similar attitude and sort of role.
Yeah. And Harley Quinn's, I think, one of the more complicated of the DC comic characters.
I was just gonna say, I find that you have a bit of an issue of flanderization with any Marvel or DC character, because they're usually characters who've been written by a number of people over a number of years. Yeah. And their characters, not only have they morphed and changed over time and been rewritten and whatever, but they've just become more and more exaggerated in various ways. And you contrast anything written by a team of people against anything written by one person who has a very singular vision, which is what Parahumans is. And the contrast is going to be, Parahumans, more depth, more nuance. You get to have a 10,000 word interlude chapter in this person's head where very little fighting is happening, and it just gives you a completely different sort of character, I think.
I think that's true. And I think, whenever you start talking about DC and Marvel, like Peter Parker, which version of Peter Parker from which author, they all have, like you said, those same overlying traits, but each author writes them as slightly different. So it is tough to parse that down.
Yep. All right. Yeah. So we'll leave those to you guys. So next one, from Callen on the Reddit. What was your favorite example of descriptive writing in Worm or Ward? There was a lot of interesting takes back when the question was first asked, but they'd like to see our take on it.
Oh, it's our own medicine, Matt.
I know. We deserve this.
What was your answer?
Well, last time I actually copped out and I picked something from Twig, which was great. Cheater. But this time I was just going to mention, I like a lot of the writing in the Dot Interlude, and I don't even know which of it I would call descriptive writing, because a lot of it is just describing the scene via the action she's taking, but that is actually my like preferred way of describing a setting is not actually stepping back and describing it in detail. There's obviously a place for that too, and I like that a lot. But I just when I read this question, I couldn't stop thinking about the Dot Interlude.
I actually agree with that, because there's a lot of authors that'll go out there, like they'll walk their characters into a new scene and they'll kind of pause the action of the scene to pull back and set the stage. And I don't think Wildbow does that as much. He does like to do it as he's going. There's much less like pauses in the action to digest what everything looks like and where every person is and what they're wearing. That still happens, but it normally happens while the scene's continuing.
Yeah. Yeah. Or it'll be like the only examples I can think of are like moments where it's like, all right, here's what you've been waiting for. You've been waiting to find out what this looks like. You go into the hangar with Eden. What is it? Okay, we're going to describe it. Otherwise, it would be a letdown. So
sure, yeah. I think when I answered this, I said the opening of Ward, that opening sentence when when Victoria's describing the city and the gold color and how it reflects off everything and the wonderful imagery of that. But man, I like your answer a lot. I really like that Dot Interlude. I just actually like sat down for the first time in my life and read Joseph Campbell's The Hero with a Thousand Faces. Like I've dissected the hero's journey like so many times throughout my life, but I've never actually sat down and read the book cover to cover. And I just did that, and it reminds me of how well constructed Dot's little journey was. We made it comparisons to the hero's journey back when we analyzed it, but man, actually sitting down and reading the book, it just makes that all the more clear to me. And it's good, really good interlude. Really good.
That's fun. Cool.
Yeah. All right. Kayakin also asks, in the process of making and publishing these podcasts, what would you say surprised you the most about any part of it? Script writing, community response, how going over the various media has influenced how you consume future media, etc. This is a really, really good question. Matt, you go first.
Man, in terms of like what probably surprised me the most was the community response. If I have to pick something out of that, out of that list, I mean, something surprised me about virtually every aspect of it. Like if you told me 2 years ago or whatever, how much time we'd be spending on these scripts and the fact that we willingly do it and enjoy it, then I would say you were crazy. But this, back to the community response, like, it's just been great and sort of like continually surprising, even though we've now been doing this for quite a while, how positive and enthusiastic everything is. And even when there's argument, it's always like we're trying to make each other stronger, not shit on each other, which is very valuable and rare.
I completely agree with that. I mean, like there's so every week we have people respond to our thread saying, I don't agree with you on this, or I read this differently, or I think you're wrong here. And it's most like 99% of the time, it's from a constructive place of, I just had a different interpretation of this than you. Mm-hmm. And it's not ever like you're wrong, you're stupid, blah, blah, blah. It's so largely positive. And God, you guys have been so great. We talk all the time. I think we've said this multiple times that like we started this thing just two guys just fooling around, and we thought we were good at it, but we didn't have enough people listening to like get that feedback. So it has just continually surprised me how kind you guys have been in your feedback to us. Like it's a validation that it's really hard to get from like your family members that listen. It's right. Really, it's wonderful.
Yeah. Right.
I like, as far as the script writing goes, like we started we were writing essays and reviews and stuff, and I haven't been doing that in a while. And I was trying to think of why. Like I've tried to sit down and write reviews or write essays, and I've had some good ideas that I actually want to execute on. But I think one of the reasons why I'm able to continue my life is because so often the script writing process feels like writing an essay to me. Like, I mean, you've seen the scripts, Matt, sometimes I literally will write a 1-page essay on something I saw, and I just stick that in my section of the script. And then I have to write like pause here for Matt's comment to remind myself to stop going forward with my next thing. So like, it's really like, I never thought that script writing would scratch a writing itch for me, but it really, really has.
Yeah, definitely. It's more than just, you know, you're solving very complex mental problems, which is a very fulfilling task to do.
And I'm continually surprised with, like, I spend a lot of time, I'll read the chapter multiple times, I'll take notes as I go, but as I'm forming the script and as I'm forming my thoughts, the things that become clear to me as I'm doing that process is continually surprising to me in a good way. I'm like, oh, I just connected these dots and look at this. It's suddenly clear and I don't know how I didn't see it before. It's so fun to do. Like this, we spend a lot of time on our scripts. And I think it's because of that the show is as enjoyable as it is.
Yeah, no, that's definitely worth underlining, because you and I read it a couple times, talk about it, and we'll still both discover things while we're writing the notes, because that just puts you in a different frame of mind in terms of thinking about it that you weren't in otherwise. And it's like, wow, I mean, there are some things where you're just like, how did I not see that the first time I read it?
Exactly.
But yeah, it's pretty cool. All right, next question from Literally Bismarck. Have you guys considered changing the scheduling to allow you to discuss the most recent chapter? Scheduling is always a pain, so I understand if there are limitations. But the last week's episode where we dropped the episode on Friday seems to make a lot of sense to Literally Bismarck. Scott, do you want to field this one?
Yeah, this is not the first time this has been asked of us, and I'm torn, because I think part of this is obviously, yes, scheduling. We have certain days we're free and certain days we're not. Part of it is maintaining consistent schedule. And we thought that, hey, being one episode behind always is better than sometimes being caught up, but sometimes being behind one episode. I'm actually curious. I might throw up a poll on Twitter or something to see what the overwhelming response to this is, because I don't know about you, Matt, but maybe it might be possible to switch if everyone's like, no, we think it would be a better show if you did it this way, especially since I think when we first assigned it, we thought Thursday shows are going to be a more often occurrence than they have been lately. So there just haven't been as many. So it might be something we could actually do that would make sense. I'm not going to promise anything. I don't know. What's your take on that?
Yeah, I think it might be worth a trial run of a few, because a lot of it comes down to the prep time issue, because, a chapter comes out Tuesday and Saturday, and then we have until basically the following Monday and Tuesday to do our prep for it. And if we I'm not going to get into the nitty gritty here, but if you shift that forward, it changes which days are available for prep, basically. And that can kind of mess things up, actually. I
mean, I will say that the episode will come out on Friday if we do this. It will. There's no way it could come out any earlier than that. And even that, it would be a big change. It would be a big change for us. And I don't know. We will see. I had something good I was going to say and I just totally forgot, but
sorry.
No, it's okay. There's a lot of hours that come. I mean, we were just talking about how much time we spend on the script, and we need a lot of time. And I worry that we shift to Friday and then Thursday episodes start coming out more regularly, and suddenly the conversation is, wouldn't it be better if you got the latest episode or the latest chapter included in it too?
Yeah.
We tried to do that, right. And then it. So yeah, I mean, I understand. There are times when, I know something big is going to happen in the next chapter. After the Kenzie stuff, I knew the next chapter was going to be a Kenzie interlude. I had convinced myself even before I read it. I knew it was going to happen, and I knew it was going to be big. And I was kind of bummed that I joined the conversation on that interlude so late. So I get why you guys like it. And it's just a dealing with scheduling. And it's also, as far as downloads go, Friday is one of the least downloaded podcast days, because people usually leave work early or they're off. Whereas Wednesday is a big day for us and across the podcast world. Wednesday is a big release day.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it motivates an experiment at least, but we'll see. We'll see. Yeah. I mean, basically, we just can't talk faster than Wildbow can write, and that's never going to stop being the problem. That's never going to stop being the bottleneck. So,
exactly.
Yeah. All right. Next question from PETA in the Discord. asks, which pairing do you ship?
I quite like the Enterprise D with the Borg cube. I liked that one a lot.
Really? Yeah. I mean, Millennium Falcon is always, Millennium Falcon and X-Wing, like flying like in tandem.
Yeah, you can't beat that.
Yeah.
I ship the hell out of those ships.
Yeah, me too.
All right. Salt on Reddit asks, who do you think is a character that Wildbow didn't write well? Should I just be on brand and say Brian? Like, I don't actually think that, but
yeah,
I think the most telling thing about this question is nothing jumped into my head the first time I heard it. Like there wasn't like a clear answer to this question. A lot of these questions, like which character this, which character that, like something pops into my head right away. This one I sat with for a while and I was like, well, I mean, maybe I could a little bit complain about this person a little bit, but there's no clear answer to this for me.
Yeah, I was gonna write Rachel in the notes just to piss you off and confuse you.
How dare you?
But
how dare you?
No, like I mean, it's one of these questions where actually what it forces you to do is interrogate what you mean by write well, and like, I mean, there may be cases where like I wouldn't have written the character that way, but that's like absolutely like, so what? Like,
yeah,
that's not why I'm not reading things to see my thoughts reflected at me.
Sure. Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah. And it's like, I don't want to answer this for any Ward characters because I think it's tough to make that call until the story has reached its zenith. But, I'm really not thinking anyone in Worm. I just like flat out said, this is not a well-drawn character. Like, I don't believe, I mean, like every one of them would be such a minor character that it didn't even matter. Mm-hmm. Like, I wasn't like ever super into Uber and Late. Like I thought they were a punchline and that's fine. Mm-hmm. But like, that doesn't hurt the story. They were bit characters.
Right. Yeah. I've seen people complain about characters who were simply minor characters. It's like, well, they weren't written poorly. They were just a minor character. Like you can't expand every corner of the thing because that's a fractally ever expanding. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I mean, I think I said publicly, I thought Accord was a poorly drawn character, but that changed as soon as I got to know him more. Right. So I feel like that happened a lot throughout this book.
Yeah. Next from Sear Graug in the subreddit. What do you think the main characters, for example, the members of the team, what are their arcs going to be, and where do you think their arcs are leading them?
Yeah, I think this was the connection back to that earlier question we were talking about, where it kind of has a similar answer, right?
Yeah, similar, but I like that this is focusing on the characters individually, and they do each have their own. I'm not going to go through all of them off the top of my head, but they all have different thematic kind of keystones, and some of them could have bad endings and some of them could have good endings or happy endings or whatever.
Yeah, I mean, and the thing that's most fascinating about this team that Wildbow has constructed is that if we're going forward with this theme of recovery, then we have almost individual case studies, right? In how different methods of trying to recover from trauma pan out. Like each person has a unique problem, and each one has a unique way of facing their unique problem. And we get to see by those successes or failures, what we're saying about recovery and what we're saying about how it's done and the best ways to do it. And if it's even possible. And I think that's really cool. That's the thing I like most about Breakthrough is it serves as these individual case studies. And we have in the middle of all of this, our protagonist, Victoria, who is probably going to have the most trouble getting to a state of recovery, getting to a breakthrough, who's trying to help these people and observing their successes and their failures. Mm-hmm. Like the thing that always like resonates with me is when she watches this woman forgive Rain and says, I wish we all had a person like that. Mm-hmm. And like, that is Victoria acknowledging recovery in other people and how it's done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I mean, they're the perfect cast of characters for the themes of the story.
Yeah. Almost as if they were drawn that way specifically to serve that function.
Yeah.
Almost. Yay. That's what writing is, guys.
Yep.
All right. Next, also from Sierra Grau, what characters have your opinions on changed the most as you learned more about them and their character arcs progressed?
Yeah. In this story, Rain, I definitely was highly suspicious of Rain, thought that he was probably bad. Wasn't sure why, like how exactly, but he was definitely hiding something and being shady. And I mean, it was perfectly set up. Like it was set up to be that way. And then you find out that he's actually, this fairly tender-hearted guy. And I mean, that's probably all going to blow back in our face in some horrible way to the person.
Sure it will.
And then I also, in terms of Worm, there's nothing beats the Bonesaw whiplash, where you go from thinking of her as just so horrible to kind of understanding where she's coming from and her being humanized.
That's a good answer. Good answer. Can I say all of them?
Sure.
I think the most wonderful thing about this story is that device that Wildbow uses, where we introduce a character, see them through our protagonist's point of view, and then we see how much that point of view has colored them when we jump into their heads and learn more about them. I think that's some of the most fun I've had in this book. These moments of realization where you're just like, oh. As far as specific, in this story in Ward, I would say Ashley, just because she came off to me earlier in the story very much like a type of character that I don't like. This kind of like, I don't want to say anime-y, but maybe anime-y, like grim dark, like she says silly things, but in an effort to sound cool, and like I could just imagine her doing like stupid poses and stuff. It's just this type of archetype I usually don't really enjoy, and she's not been that at all. She's morphed into something that I could not like. I want to go back and listen to how I described her and talked about her when we first met her, and how different that is from now, because she has completely changed in my mind, and she's one of my favorite characters in the story now.
Yeah.
Also in Worm, Emma was a pretty good one.
Yeah, good answer there too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree on that one. All right, next question, again from Sir Grau. What are your thoughts on the benefits of the arc-by-arc coverage done in Worm versus the deeper chapter dives you do now, especially with regards to listeners following along serially versus those coming to the podcast later? This is something that we've talked about, certainly.
The short answer that I think we've given a couple times before is, while I like having the room, the air to dive deep into each individual chapter like we're doing now, I do miss getting to see the entirety of an arc, like an arc's thematic structure laid out in front of me. There's beats that you pick up on if you're doing it all at once, that doing it piecemeal like this, you don't see the big picture as much. And I miss that a little bit. The wrinkle in this that I most liked, though, Matt, is this idea of those coming to the podcast later, because it hadn't occurred to me that 2 years from now, if someone starts listening to We've Got Ward, it's going to be a much tougher thing, because it's a slower roll, right? It's instead of 30 episodes, it's probably going to be like 80 or something like that. And so, the format we have for Ward might not work for binge listeners as much as I know people have gone back and started Worm after we were already done with the podcast. And that is much more binge friendly. I think that's absolutely true. Yeah.
I know some people who are following along Ward and like behind the release of Ward and who are listening to these episodes as they come out. No, I said that wrong. They'll read however far they can read it in Ward, and then they'll listen to our episodes, and then they'll read more, and then they'll listen more. And they're not actually trying to keep pace with what's being released. So I know at least someone's doing that.
But I think that's probably the best way to do it under this format.
Yeah. One thing that's different for me, and maybe not really different for Scott, or I guess it's different in an opposite way, is that a lot of I don't know, it's just a completely different experience for me doing it before, because I knew everything that was going to happen, and a lot of my excitement was the same excitement that you guys felt, was knowing what was going to happen, and Scott not knowing and it being fun. And now we're all in the same place where, and again, unless you're coming back and listening to this later, none of us know what's going to happen next. So that's a very different thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think there are moments where I'm so glad we're doing the show this way. But there are also moments when I say, from now on, after Ward is done, we're probably not going to cover something live like this. Like I think I have moments on both sides where I'm like, as much as I'm enjoying doing this, and I think people are enjoying listening to it, there was something about our previous format that I think worked so well. And once this thing is done, the best thing to do is to shift back to that. Maybe with lessons learned and changes that we can make to improve that based on what we've done here. But I go back and forth,
Yeah, I feel you.
We are committed. We're committed to finishing this thing. We started it. We're definitely going to finish it. But
right. Yeah. All right. Next from Sir Grau. Actually, sorry.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's me, right?
Yeah.
I lost my place. Yeah. What process changes have you made? What are the process changes you made since the start of the podcast? What do you think worked and didn't work? Are you considering other changes to the style in the future? To the start of from We've Got Worm to Ward, there've been a bunch of them. If we're talking about just Ward, I think you'll notice that the We Didn't Got Ward section disappeared. That wasn't just because we forgot to do it. We basically found that when we introduced that, it just gave people like carte blanche to just nitpick us to death. And we didn't think that was in service of the show.
Everyone wanted to be called out on the We Didn't Get Ward section by telling us our mistakes. And it's like, you know what? Usually the mistakes weren't that big a deal. So we're just gonna...
If we miss something that's like big enough a deal that we think we need to bring it up in the next episode, we absolutely do that. But I think having a section designed for it just encouraged a kind of thing that we didn't want. And so we cut that out. I really like the discussion question. I think some of them are better than others, and we see that in how often you guys respond to them. But I like that style a lot. I think we've shifted around how much we spend on talking about the discussion question. I think less is better because I think we want to focus on what people come for, right?
Yeah. And I think it's harder to describe actually, but we've iterated in very subtle ways in terms of how we go about talking about the chapters. When it may not even be something that's detectable, but a lot of it is especially toward the beginning of the Worm podcast. I would just write these like very detailed summaries of everything that was happening.
Yeah.
And then Scott would talk, and then we would talk about it. We would discuss it. And then I would go in the next paragraph, detailed summary of what was happening. Now it's more like I just kind of like lob a softball of like a couple sentences of what's happening. And then then via the discussion that ensues, we bring up all of the stuff that's happening in the scene. And then we move on to the next bit, which is kind of cued by a couple of sentences rather than a detailed description. And I think that's more fun for a discussion, first of all. And I think it also makes her a little bit smoother listening.
Yeah, I think it flows a lot better than just, I think you listen to some of those early episodes, it's very clear. Matt finished his line, then I did my line, and then Matt did his line, and then I did my line. And I think that's a lot more obvious. This is much more of a discussion. And it's there in those early Worm episodes, you would pull stuff out and I would trust you basically and say, okay, if he didn't mention it here, I'm not going to bring it up or it's not worth talking about. But I think now if there's something that you didn't specifically mention in your write up, I pull it in and say, no, I want to talk about this. So there's a lot more moments in this where you hear me say, but before we move on, I just wanted to touch on this thing. And it's because there was something that I had something to say and I wanted to talk about. So I think it's a lot more, whereas you kind of led the discussion, I think this is a lot more collaborative. And I think it stems from the fact that we are both experiencing at the same time. Yeah. But I think we can take that lesson and take it back to another format where one of us knows more than the other and still make it a little more collaborative, even though one person is probably driving the conversation a little more.
Yeah, I agree completely.
All right. Yeah. Next.
Next.
This one. Okay, so this is, which one is it? Which one are we on? We lost our place, guys. I'm sorry. I think we're on 25 right here.
Okay. All right. Yeah. So which of the, from Shinichi on the Reddit, which of the entire parahuman cast of Worm/War do you think would make a somewhat decent or even good parent?
Yeah.
And they have their suggestions, which are Dragon, Chevalier, and Miss Militia.
Yeah, which I think are just like the nicest ones.
Yeah.
Again, like the previous parent question, this was nothing like jumped to mind, especially from a parahuman perspective. I think Chevalier is probably a fair answer. He seems like a really kind person that genuinely cares about people. You know, like I think about Legend and how he handled Kid Win and how he helped Kid Win. And Legend's certainly not a perfect person at all, but I thought the way he kind of was a mentor to Kid Win in a moment of need was pretty commendable.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah, I mean, I think he is a father also. So
that's true. He is actually a real life father. Yeah.
My answer was Dennis because he can put them on timeout.
Well done.
But also
see, Matt just put Dennis in the notes and did not put why. So that was a surprise for me.
That was actually I only saw the joke later. I chose Dennis just because of in his interlude we saw what a selfless, caring person he is. And if he wasn't dead, he'd be a great dad.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
All right, now we move on to Stuck in Reddit Factory, who is also, I think, a bird in our Discord chat, who asks, you've been doing We've Got Ward almost as long as We've Got Worm. How do you feel about the format shift in retrospect? How, if at all, would you change how you did either? We kind of touched on this a little bit already, but I feel good-ish. I like the show we're producing right now. I think it's really good. I think our episode last week, we both agreed was one of our better ones, which was something I think surprised both of us because like the 3 chapters we covered last week were not like big momentous, like huge things are happening chapters. But I think we distilled out some great stuff from them. So I think we're doing some of our best work. Would I change how I did We've Got Worm? What the stuff I did in there? I think I would say yes to some stuff. I don't know about you.
Yeah, I don't know. I'd have to think for quite a while about, because like I'm really happy with We've Got Worm as a thing to have put out there in the world. But there are certain, like especially seeing how people reacted to it, which is obviously cheating, to sort of like know what the legacy of it was. There are certain things that I might have de-emphasized or emphasized more. That maybe there were people I would have paid more attention to or less.
I think I agree with that. And I think we're going to have a question that I was planning on answering. So maybe I'll save that. My short answer, I'll get into this a bit in a future question. But my short answer here is I don't think I did as good of a job of making clear the delineations between me showing what my personal reaction to an event was versus me analyzing what I think the book was saying. And I think there were times when I did both of those things, but I did not make the delineation between those things as clear as they should be, which is why we saw a lot of comments in relation to the whole "you're being unfair to Taylor" thing. Mm-hmm. And that's my bad. And it's something I think I've tried to make clearer in this show. And I think I've succeeded at that.
Yeah, that's a good way of putting it.
All right.
Yeah. But in the end, we're also very small.
Yeah.
All right. So
now I'm sad.
We're talking about regrets and would we have done things differently?
Yeah.
All right. So next from Stuck in Reddit Factory, who do you think is the better protagonist, Taylor or Victoria?
Bringing out the big guns.
Yeah. It's a big question. So give a few answers. They point out that you can give answers with different contexts, like who do you like the most as a person, as a character, as a hypothetical tape version of yourself, or a teammate, or a rival, or at a different stage of their career. I mean, it's kind of interesting because they kind of deconstruct the question for us.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Again, this is something that's hard to say. I think I like Taylor as a protagonist better right now because I've seen her journey and I've seen her story completed and I know where it ends. I think Victoria is a fascinating character, and I love how she approaches things. And I love, one of the things I love most about this book is how the structure of the story is matching Victoria's like mindset. And what I mean by that is we see, like, we talked about this in We've Got Worm a lot, how Taylor's point of view colored her entire interaction. And I think that the sign of a good writer is that you can do that and transfer that to a new character. And it's the same general idea that Victoria's point of view colors her interaction with the world. But because her point of view is so different, we see that it's a completely different color, and it's a completely different reaction to thing. And her approach to every interaction, every fight, every verbal conflict, everything is different because she's a different person. And I think that shows a skill in the writer where they can take that central idea that, hey, point of view, first person point of view, can change how you perceive the story that's unfolding. But to do it with a character that's so different is like almost testing yourself. And I like that. I think he's succeeded in these tests against his own ability. Yeah,
no, I agree. I don't have a, I mean, I agree with your analysis. I don't think I would, I don't even, that's the thing. You can't use the word better without contextualizing it. Like, better, how do you mean?
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, I mean, Taylor engaged our sympathies a lot more, like, viciously, I'll say, by being the subject of bullying, which is something that everyone can relate to. You can't relate to being made into a blob, although you may have something in your past that allows you to like abstractly relate to that. But like, that doesn't mean Taylor's better. That just means maybe she's easier to sympathize with. And that's just one facet of many different facets where they differ. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting to think about, but I don't think it needs an answer.
I will say that I think Victoria is drawn to be slightly less likable. And I think that's an intentional thing. Like, I think I see a lot of people saying, well, I don't like her. She's up on her high horse, and she is pretty like over the top and dismissive of a lot of people. And I'm like, yeah, but I agree with you, but I think that's intentional. Like, I think that's part of what we're exploring with the character. And you're right that Taylor was this like downtrodden, bullied person that a lot of the people reading the story can very much relate to, myself included. Victoria was a very popular person who was with a wildly successful family, and she had this successful Cape career. Like, she was always going to be this star. And then all this bad stuff happened to her. So she is someone that is difficult to relate to, and has many different aspects of her personality pushing and pulling at her. She's got the old glory girl and who that person was, and how that colors her perspective. And she's got her trauma and how that is so all encompassing that, yeah, sometimes she doesn't notice stuff that goes on around her. Sometimes she doesn't emotionally react to other people's trauma as much as she should because she's so delved in her own shit. And that's, to me, completely designed in the character.
Yeah, completely. I agree.
And maybe you just don't like that as much, and that's fine. I find it fascinating though.
Yeah, right. And it's like, well, yeah, no, I mean, you're right that it's not a likable character trait, but yeah. I don't think that characters are there to be liked.
Yeah.
So I don't care about that.
And I think, Taylor was so liked that I think some people missed some of the more troublesome aspects of her personality.
Right.
Whereas they're a little bit more front and center with a character you don't identify with as much, like Victoria.
Yep. Okay.
All right. What classification? This is also stuck in Reddit Factory. What classification of power would you want? None isn't an option. If you lived on pre-Golden Morning Bet, post-Golden Morning Gimel, that Earth where powers are common as on Bet, or Earth as is.
My answer is still mover, do all the above, because it would be the most fun. It's the one that least interferes with my thoughts, and also would allow me to run away from the megalopolis as fast as I could.
Well, there you go.
And to like hide in a corner world.
Yeah, and that's why I pick Stranger for all the above, so I can hide from all the terrible shit.
Yeah.
There we go.
Good point. Yeah, you'd probably be. Yeah, no, that's a great answer. So again, stuck in Reddit Factory. How many people have you personally convinced to read Worm, and why isn't that number higher?
Well, Matt, I feel like you win on this one because one of them's me.
Yeah, no, I don't actually know what my personal number is. I mean, at least one.
There you go. I have two. I have my friend Sammy and James Gentry, who's been on some of our other podcasts before, who actually just finished Spec today and sent me a very long Gmail message about it. And he's like, okay, so here's my immediate thoughts, but I need to sit you down and talk to you later. And I'm like, or you could just play my podcast and talk. I talked all about it, but he's been listening along too. He's just a little behind on the podcast part, but yeah, so at least two. And hopefully more. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I'm not sure if I can count Michael or if Daniel convinced Michael to read it.
It's probably Daniel.
Yeah, probably.
But
I mean, Daniel's the father of us all. So
yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
Thank you, Daniel.
Yeah. Okay.
And lastly, Stuck in Reddit Factory says, how do you feel about the following theory? Privacy and autonomy are to ward what bullying and cooperation are to Worm. I like it. He wrote a big long post about taking each one of our breakthrough characters and showing how both privacy and autonomy are aspects of both their trauma and their character. And I thought it was pretty convincing, I thought.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, man, like it's really interesting that like autonomy and cooperation are almost opposites. They're not really
true.
They're connotationally different things, but
yeah.
But one of them is insisting that you have the right to be left alone, if you will, and the other one is insisting on the importance of not being left alone. So
yeah,
that's fun.
Yeah, that is true. I hadn't thought of it that way.
Cool.
Yeah, it's an interesting theory. I think that's something we'll pay attention to going forward and see if it continues to line up like that.
Yeah, no, the autonomy thing is very important to Victoria, and now that you've pointed that out to me, I definitely want to like bring that up more often.
Yeah.
Cool. So next from let's see, user Wild Bow.
It's a weird name.
Asks, out of Worm and Ward, what character would you say you like that you didn't think would be on the list of top 25 or even top 50 most popular characters? Why?
See, Wildbow did this thing where he made his questions like 20 times harder by adding little clarifications to them.
Yeah.
So it's not just a character you like, but one that's unpopular that you like.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what do you think, Scott?
Man, I don't know. I like your answer.
My answer is the Bat Biker. because like just as soon as we met him, I was like, I bet this guy has a cool backstory. And then Victoria leaves him in a tree. And I just want to know more about how Bat Biker's doing. How did he get out of the tree?
Yeah, that's a good one. I'm going to say Scrub, the guy with the terrible cape name.
I like that.
But a guy who I was always really interested in him and his power, and he ends up being so key to everything. But we just don't really see a lot about him.
I like Skidmark simply because of his like outrageously profane way of speaking, which would never fail to entertain me. You reminded me of him by mentioning Scrub.
That's fair.
Speaking of unpopular characters.
Yeah. All right. Then Wildbow goes on to ask, I'm just realizing now that I put this as Widbow in my sheet, so I just missed an L for some reason. What characters would you smack across the back of the head if you had to pick one? Which ones that you don't think would be the general community's top 5 or top 10, I guess, of smacking in the back of the head? So, Matt, who would you smack?
So the first pick, which would probably be in the top 5 or top 10, would be Kraus. Because he just like needs a little bit of head smacking and just like, hey, you have a lot of programming up there in your head that's causing you to make some bad choices. Let me just sit you down, explain some things to you. We can get through this. It's gonna be fine. And then the one that I kind of had to reach for it to find someone who needed a smack in the head but wouldn't go in the top 10 would be Number Man. And I say that specifically because he has his like he has this like ethos, but it seems pretty flimsy. Like I'm afraid he might be the kind of guy who thinks he's really smart because his power basically cheats and makes him smart, but actually he hasn't really thought things. Like I always think about when he defeated the guy in the Cauldron base, and the guy was chastising him for being immoral, and Numberman's like, morals. And it's like now that's like really you're dismissing the idea of morals, Numberman. Kurt, is it? You get a head smack for that.
That's great. That's a good answer. I cheated and said everybody.
Okay. All right.
Well, but see, I think one of the things about storytelling and about reading is that dramatic irony always gives you you always have a leg up on your characters, right? You always generally kind of, not only do you sometimes know more than the characters know, but also you're seeing this from a kind of removed perspective. Like you're not living the event with them at the time. You're kind of watching it unfold at your own pace. So there's a general air of authority that grants you. And it kind of makes you like look at what your characters are doing and just going, come on, man, come on. And it's like I've done that with just about every character. Like I did a lot with Taylor, much to the chagrin of some people. Victoria has moments where I'm just like that too. Both their parents had moments where I was like, just guys, just stop. I think the way Dinah chooses to handle things sometimes makes me go, like, I know she's doing her power and stuff, but like, I'm just like, there's got to be a better way of having this information than like some words on some scraps of paper. There's got to be a better way to do this.
No, apparently not, Scott. Apparently not.
Yeah, it's the only way.
Yeah, I mean, like even the smack on the head thing, you could say like in Kenzie's interlude, we're very often like cringing and like, no, don't do it, and that's sort of a form of like,
sure,
don't do it.
Sure.
Right.
Maybe Gary. Smack Gary on the head.
Yeah, that's a good
Gary,
one.
you stupid racist. Knock it off.
That's a good one.
Okay.
Next from Wild Bow again. What do you guys think the biggest general level disagreement or perspective difference is between you two when it comes to the story?
This was hard for us, Matt. Mm-hmm. I think he designed this to be hard for us.
Yeah.
The only thing that I could really attach onto is one of the, I wouldn't say the most contentious arguments we've had, but one of the things where I just don't think we were able to see eye to eye at all was the different ways we interpret the concept of free will and determinism, and how your view of it is basically the exact opposite of mine. I've gotten to a place where I like understand exactly why you feel this way. And, I can't it's very difficult to refute your opinion because I think it's well founded and well argued, but I just don't like it.
Yeah. I mean, without getting into the actual discussion and staying meta over it, it does influence a lot of things, because I think because of that, we have different attitudes about issues as far ranging as like guilt and punishment and culpability and
redemption,
redemption, responsibility. And like, I think a lot of it washes out because, there's a phrase that I'm probably abusing by using it in this context because it doesn't quite apply, but basically it all adds up to normality, which means like your esoteric weird explanation for how the universe works still has to add up to what we experience as normal. And even though I don't think humans have free will, I also am capable of having this conversation with you without like having to have all kinds of like circular thoughts about the fact that I have no idea what process is actually originating these sounds coming out of my mouth. Because it doesn't really matter. Turns out
that's true.
But I think that's definitely one where I think like under the hood there's disagreement, but then it ends up not mattering a huge amount. I think, and maybe this is more like in story disagreement. Like I genuinely am like more suspicious of certain characters. It's not always a joke.
That's true. I mean, yeah, I think every time you bring it up, we play it off as a joke because it's funny. But I think there's a kernel of, no, I'm seriously suspicious of this character in that. Yeah.
Yeah. But that's not really a disagreement. That's just like, oh, no. you don't see that? Okay.
No. I do think the free will stuff colors how much we emphasize things like the Seamerg, Dinah, the Contessa, their powers, and the weight we put on those, because like those don't necessarily mesh with my worldview, right? So I think I have this, like, in my analysis, the importance of those elements are kind of downplayed. Even though I recognize they do have effects and matter to the story, it's just like how it actually shakes out is probably a little bit different in my mind because of the disagreement about free will.
Yeah, I think we've even probably discussed these things when they came up in the past.
Yeah,
so.
I think so. Yeah. On the flip side, Wildbow also asks us, what are the biggest non-general specific disagreement or perspective differences between the two of us when it comes to the story?
Yeah, I guess we just kind of covered one, sort of.
Yeah. But I think the other is how much you get into the terrible things that happen to people.
Yeah.
Like, and it's not to say that I don't enjoy them. Like, I love horror movies. Like, I love kind of being grossed out and scared, but like, I don't know. I think you enjoy the reactions they give you more than I do.
Yeah. There's definitely a like some like the Bonesaw interlude where she's doing these horrible things and you're learning horrible things and it's all horrible. Like on the one hand, I'm experiencing that correctly as horror, but on the other hand, I'm like delighted that this is working on me and that I've like found this excellent example of horror, and I want to like, or just anything that makes me feel something, frankly. It can be good or bad. It gives me that, and maybe other people are like this, and let me know if you are, but like, I'm on the one level just reading it and enjoying it, and on the second level sort of like noticing that it is really awesome and that it's affecting me strongly, and enjoying that separately from whatever the other emotion is.
Yeah, I think that's fair. Yeah. And also, I think we both disagree about whether or not Taylor's dead. No, I'm just kidding. She's totally dead.
She's not. She's alive.
She's totally dead.
She's
totally dead.
She's totally fine. No, that's I think that is legitimate disagreement, actually.
I don't actually think I believe she's dead. I don't know. I go back and forth. I think one of the reasons why this works, though, is that we don't have a lot of like really fundamental perspective differences. And like you and I were talking about this question earlier today, and it basically got down to like, sometimes we interpret the scene slightly differently, but then it's like we share interpretations and we might not always agree on it, but it's like, yeah, I can see where you got there and I'm not going to tell you you're wrong. I might have a slightly different idea of what that means, but it doesn't mean we have to fight about it.
Well, yeah. And very often we are legitimately like, oh, maybe I'm wrong. Because I mean, it's a book.
I've legitimately had moments in the recording sessions where I'm just like, oh, I interpreted this thing completely wrong. And I think that because you have convinced me that your interpretation of it is a better one.
Yeah. And vice versa. Definitely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. Next question from Woodbow. Once again, which characters would you most like to hang out with or introduce to your friend group?
Is none of them an option?
Like we were talking about this before the recording. We were like, why is this so hard? Like we both spent so much time on this one. And like my explanation to myself was like, well, all of the villains are bad people. Mm-hmm. And most of the heroes are like really, really serious people, really joyless people.
Yeah.
So like, and even the people who I don't know, they're all kind of messed up. And I don't know if I can think of any.
I mean, you never want to be that guy that like brings a friend to a party and he's like super awkward the whole time.
Yeah. Or like I was going to say like, and for the first few scenes we meet Sprite, he kind of just seems like a easygoing guy. And then he turns out to be a dick.
Yeah, totally.
So I don't even trust my own judgment.
Feel really bad about that.
My cheating answer would actually be Sylvester from Twig.
Okay.
I would love to hang out with Sylvester.
Well, that means nothing to me.
Give him a hug.
I mean, like, some of these people I'd like to hang out with, but I wouldn't like I wouldn't be like, hey, Alec, come to my friend group and fuck them up royally.
Yeah, good point.
All right. We kind of cheated on that, but that's okay.
Yeah.
Wildbow also asks us, did the works change your perspective about anything? Yes.
Yeah.
You go first, Matt.
I mean, man, lots of stuff, but I'll focus on like more recently, Ward has kind of like given me a bit of a kick in terms of my feelings about like forgiveness and like the value of asking for forgiveness for things that you've done wrong. And that which wasn't even something that was really something I thought about. Like, should I ask for forgiveness for things that I've done wrong? Like, well, it seems sort of obvious when you put it that way, but it never seemed like compelling that I actually should do it for any good reason until I spent enough time in Victoria's head. And now I'm like, I'm much more likely to, not that kind of thing happens very often, because I don't think I do a lot of terrible things very often.
Yeah. What are you doing, Matt?
Yeah. Well, just like it makes me more prone to thinking like, oh, did I do something wrong? You know, did I do something where I should consider that I need to be, that I need to, forgiveness might not even be the right word. Just like Victoria's sort of mindset of keeping track of whether she's wronged anyone is something that I think has rubbed off on me.
Yeah, I think that's a really good answer. And I've noticed that myself too. I think the power of forgiveness is something that the book has kind of touched on. That's why I think the scene with Rain meant so much to me on a personal level. This idea that giving forgiveness is this powerful thing that you have. And it makes me realize that the importance of, in my life, like handing that out, but also the importance of seeking it. And like, I think in anything you do, like in any bit that you're wronged or that you've wronged other people, getting to that point is very important. And I think the book has shown me that a little bit. My answer is around, like, I think being in Taylor's head for as long as I was cued me in on some tendencies to justify and rationalize in myself, in interactions with other people, the stuff that I'm doing and how I can convince myself that something I normally would not find was okay is okay in this case because X, Y, Z. And I think just reading the story made me so much more aware of how I approach conflict and interactions in my life and areas in which I need to get better at that. And I think it has improved my ability to do that. But there, I mean, like, that's one aspect of a book that has fundamentally changed the way I see a lot of different things. The hard focus on a real gray morality in this book really challenged my moral senses. And I don't think my morality has completely shifted, but I do think it was challenged a lot through this book. And I do still think that we interpreted what the book was trying to say about some of these choices, but definitely on a personal level, there were moments where I was like convinced 100% that this was definitely the wrong thing to do. And the book says, well, are you sure about that? Are you sure? Are you really sure? And I thought that was pretty great that it could do that.
Yeah, totally. Absolutely. All right. Next one from Wildo again. Are there any gaps, plot arcs, or setting elements that you wish had been filled in differently?
I said, and I think we said this when we were talking about it, when the Undersiders, when Taylor particularly like took down the dragon robots, I didn't like a lot of the actual execution of that, how that all played out. And I would have liked to see that like fleshed out a little bit more. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Like I'm someone who actually like tantalizing world building bits in the background, not being filled out. It just makes me feel like the world is bigger.
Yeah, that's fair.
So just like related to like setting elements being filled out, I never want more. I'm always like, yeah, no, that's perfect. It lets me imagine things. And I regarding plot arcs, like I remember being frustrated with the Slaughterhouse a lot arc the first time I read it. But that was not true on the subsequent rereads. And when we did it in We've Got Worm, I had a completely different opinion about it, and I'm only kind of now realizing that now that I'm answering this question, and I'm not entirely sure why, other than the obvious answer that I knew where it was going. But yeah, I don't know.
I think I could see that. I mean, there's something like, it's this, first of all, we're seeing some of the same characters you've already seen, and there's this like, it's a lot of like very quick escalation, but it's a lot of jumping from place to place to place. So I could see how that could be less than satisfying. I mean, I enjoyed it. I felt like there was this real ramping up uncontrollably that made it just a joy to read. But yeah, I could see that.
There's so much awesome stuff that happens in there that it almost confuses me that I would have remembered it. Like if you had asked me after the first read, I would have been like, oh yeah, that was the weakest part. And I'm like, well, no, no, actually. So yeah, I don't know.
I still retain that the time skip works very well, and I still really like it. And in fact, when I talked about how I have essay ideas, one of the things I want to write about is like an in-depth, deep dive analysis of the time skip and why I think it's as effective as it is. Even more depth than we covered on the podcast. So hopefully, fingers crossed, I'll get around to taking time on that, because I really want to dive into the text and spend some real time on why exactly it works for me.
Yeah, that'd be awesome.
Because it's pretty controversial from what I've gathered. All right. The second to last question from Widbow. Much like a serial, your podcasting journey doesn't allow much revision or editing of the past entries. Is there anything you'd wished you'd done differently from the start, or that you regretted in retrospect? Yeah, this was the question I was talking about when I said we'd cover some of this stuff earlier in the podcast. Look, I love all the people that listen to this. I think they're all great. I think there was a vocal minority of people that had a lot of problems with some of our interpretations of things. And I think we generally responded to too many of those people on the podcast. If I had to go back and do it, I would not have spent as much time in the recording arguing with some of these people. I think that was a mistake. And if I could go back, I would not do that again.
Yeah, because I mean, not only did it use up a lot of airtime and was repetitive, but I think also it did not really convince the people who weren't open to being convinced. So
yeah,
and man, that even sounds wrong the way I said it, because like I don't think I even wanted to convince anyone. I was just trying to stake out my interpretation. But
right. I mean, like I think there are two different types of disagreements with what we did. One of them was just, I don't think your interpretation's right. And that's fair. And my argument was made via the podcast. I don't want to relitigate that argument. Right. The other was an argument saying, you are presenting yourself as doing this a certain way, and here's why I think you're not doing it that way. And those were the arguments I really, really got into, because I vehemently disagree that with people that say that we were letting our own biases completely color everything, and we were just like being moral arbiters of this whole world. I don't think that's what we were doing. And those were the people I got dragged into fights with, and that was the people I think we fought with too much on air.
Yeah, and when you reference like us both doing a better job at separating when we're making a personal claim of like, oh, that was a bad choice versus an analytical claim about what the story is saying.
Right.
Where we failed to make that distinction was where we fell down, basically, because it was genuinely unclear, probably for a lot of people. So.
Yeah, I completely cop to that, and that is, I hope people listening to this show agree that we've done a better job at drawing that line.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we're definitely trying to. Yeah,
sure. Yeah.
All right. Last question from Wildbow. Are there any characters your opinions have changed on given time or reflection, not necessarily just from reading about more about them?
Yeah, so I think this was like an add-on to Siergrau's question about how our opinions changed based on the reading. This is just, have you sat with characters and your opinions changed on them? So my answer is Amy. Amy is one of the characters that I struggle with the most, Matt. And it's not even, it's not even because anything in the text, because I just go back and forth on how sympathetic I am to her versus how angry I am for what she did. And I go back and forth on that. I think someone called us out in an earlier episode. You said that one of the worst things Amy did was turn herself in and go to the birdcage, when way back in Worm, I had said that I think she made the right decision there. And I think I changed my mind on whether that was good or bad. Like, on the one hand, it's taking responsibility for your actions. On the other hand, it's running away from your responsibilities. And she's just a character I go back and forth on constantly. And the more I think about it, the more conflicted I am about her. And I think that's kind of intentional. I don't think we're supposed to have a clear read on Amy, especially in the story that we're in right now.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I'm more sympathetic to Amy than the average reader, perhaps. But my answers were actually, it was funny. I wrote down these names before I realized what I was doing. But the pattern was Taylor, Brian, Lisa. I didn't write Rachel because I think that I actually got a beat on Rachel, and I think I actually got a beat on Alec from the start, and they didn't really change too much. But like the difference in Taylor, Brian, and Lisa on a first read through versus second read through versus doing an in-depth podcast on the show made me think of these as three very different characters. And it wasn't, so to clarify, like it's not just that like by the end of Worm I had a different read on Brian. It's that it took me a whole second read through to really get that second to get that new read on him. Yeah,
I think I like that a lot. I think that's a great answer, and it's a perspective I can't have since I've just read it the one time. So I like that,
because so much of what you know about Brian and Lisa, for example, is like a put on that they're showing Taylor toward the beginning, and then by the time you really know them, a lot of the story has passed, and then when you go back and you read it again, you see, oh, this was actually Lisa doing this thing. She's actually terrified here, or what have you.
Yeah. I wonder, there's a good conversation to be had, and maybe we'll do an episode of our regular podcast about this one time, about the idea of rereading and rewatching and redigesting material you've already experienced once. Because we live in a world where there's so much entertainment being thrown at us. We're never going to read all the books. All the books are not going to be read, but there is value to revisiting something you've read before or you've seen before. You take something new away from it each time you do that. So, I'd hate in this new world of media for people to not get to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I'll reread things and swear that I just never read that particular paragraph the first time, So,
well, sometimes you might not. I mean, sometimes for whatever reason, as you're reading along, you jump a paragraph or jump a page and don't really even notice it, or do that thing where you zone out for half a minute and realize you've been reading but haven't been reading.
Right.
It happens.
Yeah. Everybody does that.
Yeah. All right. Now we have a question from Zizen, our last question about Worm and Ward. And they ask, what aspects of Wildbow's writing do you feel has changed, improved the most between Worm and Ward? Matt?
If I had to pick one thing, which is difficult because these a lot of things have improved. It would be the ability to communicate subtext precisely. And I'm going to attempt to explain what I mean by that.
Okay.
Which is that there will be something going on in the scene that the character is not thinking about or describing. None of the other characters are talking about, but you're walking away from that scene understanding exactly what is really going on, or what is really going on with the other characters, what's really going on with your point of view character. The implications of it are hinted to you in ways that can almost bypass the point of view character's attention and just occur to you. There's a huge amount of nuance in this, and it's what I see as being like a very, very high level writer skill. That is the kind of thing that I try to learn from and pay a lot of attention to. I don't know if I've even described what I'm talking about very well. So
I think you did. I think so. Yeah, it's kind of like, the cool thing about this is before we started this project, I wondered, what is this difference going to be between Worm Wildbow and Ward Wildbow? Is it going to be like, what is it going to look like? How different? And I think the differences are subtle. Like, I think he's a better writer now. I absolutely think that. I think he writes with more confidence. I think he takes more chances. The reason why I haven't been able to predict the story, like you guys all were jokingly amazed with how I predicted some elements of the last story, is I think because he's taking bigger swings and more risks and doing things a little bit more unexpectedly. But it feels like an evolution. This is not you can tell that he's still the same writer. You can tell that he's still the same person. He's just done it more. Like, I mean, the honest truth is that the more you write, the more confident you become in your ability, and the more willing you are to do things. I think the idea of writing a protagonist as complicated as Victoria was probably something very daunting to him, and something he probably would not have tackled 5 years ago. And he's doing it now, and I think he's succeeding. I know that's a semi-controversial opinion right now, but I think the character is nuanced and complicated and complex, and it's there. It's all there. The text is communicating what he wants it to, but it's doing it in a way that it's not that it throws you for a loop, but it just keeps you guessing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I agree.
I think, does that count as an answer?
Yeah, sure.
I don't know if we got specific enough, but I hope that counts as an answer.
Yeah, I think so.
That was a really good question.
Yeah. And now we're moving on to, we have 2 questions about Weaver Dice.
All right.
Which I appreciate.
Yeah.
Kalsubalu asks, can you explain what your powers are in the Weaver Dice campaign? You never took any time in the actual podcast to go over your powers, and I feel like I have at best a shaky idea of what each of the PCs can actually do. Well, Kalsubalu, that's kind of intentional.
Yeah. I think we can do like maybe a quick rundown about what we know so far.
Yeah. And I'll preface it by saying that Rusty actually has like man, it's been a little bit since I looked at my notes, but I believe it's called a perk where no one except me and him know what his powers are. So yeah. Scott and Daniel don't know what his powers are.
No, either. I mean, if you've listened to the latest episode, the reveal of Rusty's power was a live reveal to the two of us, just like it was to you. Our reaction was reacting to learning what this thing is for the first time. So it's not something we knew about at all. Billy has is it technically a changer form? I don't know.
I think it's technically a changer form, although I call it breaker every single time. Okay.
Yeah, he turns into a smoke cloud that is invisible and we've seen it go through small objects, so he can shrink down or be smoke and go through objects, and can screw with people's heads. I think we outlined in the latest episode like the specifics of his thing, but basically he has the ability to rewrite memories. He can rewrite a minute of time for an easier saving throw, and he can write 5 minutes for a more difficult one. And it seems to get a little bit easier to do the more he does it to a person, but also it has what appears to be long-lasting ramifications the more he does it to someone. Yeah, and that's all we know so far.
Yeah, that's all we know about Billy. Chad has a drone which appears to have a wide variety of capabilities and an ability to swap out components and do some pretty interesting and powerful things. And also the drone appears to have a little bit of a mind of its own, we've learned recently. And then he also makes garbage knickknacks.
The funniest thing about Chad's power is how much people focus on the knickknacks, which I think is fair because they're hilarious, and how little people and how often people forget about his semi-sentient drone friend he made. Yeah, which is a pretty important aspect of his power, I think.
Yeah, and he also has a visor that lets him see through objects up to a certain radius. I mean, I know we're not being super like clear in these descriptions, because frankly, to be clear would be quite boring. Like we'd have to go into like, well, you roll this and you can see this far with the odds, and then you have to check the other roll. Yeah, no.
We basically decided that it would be more entertaining to reveal the powers as we go. I know Billy's got some tricks up his sleeve still, and I'm assuming the other two guys do as well. So
yeah. And I think also we're trying to keep the character sheets updated. We may not be doing a good job at that. And in an ideal world, we would be putting the powers that we've revealed on the show in the character sheet so that you can see what they are in detail.
I would like to say that my character sheet is fully updated to reflect that.
Excellent. Good job.
So thank you.
Good job, Billy.
All right. The final question of the night comes from Nils, who sent us an email, and he asked, this one's just for you, Matt. He says, I was curious why you chose Las Vegas as the location for the Weaver Dice campaign, especially since we see a good number of the Protectorate capes there in Worm. What made you choose Vegas, and how do you plan on interacting with or avoiding the canon knowledge we have about the city from Wildbow's work?
Well, I thought about this quite a bit. And I put in a gap of time, which I thought would be suitably, a gap of time between this story and Worm that I thought would be large enough to explain away any kind of stepping on the canon that I did of like, oh, well, you didn't put this character there. Well, I could just say like, well, they didn't move there yet, and we don't know otherwise, so I'm gonna just go with that. And also, I specifically chose it to be Vegas because I thought there was so much potential in the mastery, strangery machinations of the Vegas Cape scene that we briefly saw when Taylor was interacting with the Vegas Capes, and that just sounded awesome. And I got carried away thinking about it, and then I placed it immediately after one of the major Endbringer disasters to kind of create a inciting event, if you will, where that can actually kind of paper over a lot of continuity details, where it's like, well, everything's in chaos right now. I didn't. All that said, it wouldn't break my heart if someone told me like, hey, you really screwed up the canon here. Like this isn't supposed to be this way. I would just be like, well, sorry. That's I mean, does anyone really pay attention to continuity when they're doing like D&D? I mean,
no. I think overall, this thing's supposed to be a fun way for us to tell a story that we hope is both funny, but I think we got some dramatic stuff planned that I think is going to be a lot of fun. So I think in general, we're not too worried about continuity.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've done my best.
Yeah, I think you'll be fine.
Yeah. All right. Yeah, that's
it.
all. That's all I got to say about that.
We did it.
All right. Yeah. So that's all we got for you this week on We've Got Ward. You guys are all part of this show, so feel free to provide us with advice, questions, or thoughts on this week's reading.
You can reach us via email at gotwormpod@gmail.com or on Twitter at gotwormpod. My personal Twitter is at scottdaly85, and Matt's is at Mailbag.
Yep. If you're not already subscribed to We've Got Ward, we strongly recommend you do so and never miss an episode. You can find us on iTunes, Stitcher, YouTube, Google Play, and pretty much anywhere else in the world that you can listen to podcasts.
And as always, you can find this, all the other podcasts we do, and all of our writing, essays, film, and TV criticism, and more at dailyplanetfilms.com. It's a weird week for us here. We're basically taking off on every other show except for this one. So we'll be back to normal with your regularly scheduled programming next week and beyond, because we're starting our rebrand here pretty soon, a couple weeks.
Yeah, that's right, Scott.
Crap, I got a lot of work to do. I got so much work to do.
And if you like our shows and want to support them, consider donating to our Patreon account, patreon.com/dailyplanetfilms. You can donate $1 a month or whatever else you can afford. Supporting us on Patreon gives you tons of great bonuses like voting in our quarterly fan art contest, Q&A sessions, access to live streams of our recording sessions, and our excellent Discord chat. And as always, make sure you go over to Wildbow's Patreon, patreon.com/wildbow, and donate to him as well, because this is his world. We're just answering questions about it.
And if you cannot afford to donate right now, that is absolutely okay. You can instead help us out by heading over to Apple Podcasts and leaving us a rating and a review. We have no new reviews to read this week,
Yeah.
Vacation's screwing everything up.
I think I read it.
Oh boy.
I'm so confused. What day is it?